You're listening to Dairy Voice by Dairy Business News, a podcast exclusively for the dairy industry.
One of our sponsors of the Dairy Voice podcast is National DHIA. NDHIA ensures information accuracy and represents their members' interests. They are the direct voice for the dairy information industry. To find out more, go to dhia.org.
Well, we'd like to welcome you to the latest edition of the Showbox Sires series, The Evolution of the Great Cow. As we talk a lot about on these podcasts, we talk about cows and we talk about the people that help make the cows. But today, we're going to talk about one of the greats who has helped us all develop value and knowledge of the Holstein cow. Last week, we were saddened by the news of the passing of our great friend and mentor, Horace Backus of Mexico, New York. And we thought it was appropriate to develop a podcast that reflects on Horace's career and his life and his impact on our business. Today, we're going to have a discussion with two of the men that were closest to Horace in the Holstein circles, Joel Hastings, formerly of Sandy Creek, New York, and Dave Rama of Delhi, New York, two men that have spent a lot of time with Horace and know him well. Our discussion today, like many of you will have, is kind of like sitting on a showbox, remembering the great stories of Horace, and his passing triggers these great memories. So I'd like to welcome you each. Joel and David, good afternoon.
Great to see you, Tim.
Hey, thanks, Tim. Looking forward to the conversation to hear what you guys recall and can share.
So Joel, much has been written the past week with stories and obituaries of Horace's career and life. Could you lead us through, you've worked on some of this, lead us through a little bit of the story of Horace Backus?
Thank you. I'm happy to share a few recollections. The Backus family in Mexico and my family were close friends as well as business colleagues in the Holstein business, really over several generations. Horace's grandfather and father, his father was R. Austin Backus. My grandfather, Morris Prescott, did a lot of business together, but they were also great friends. And so I met them in that context when I first got involved in our publishing business, Holstein World, back in the late 60s. At that time, Horace and his brother Charles were full bore as R. Austin Backus Inc., managing sales across New York, in Pennsylvania, and nationally. And they were at the top of their game. As just a youngster getting into the business, I didn't fully appreciate all of their reputations and capabilities, but over time I came to understand what an important role they played and Horace played in the development of the value for Registered Holsteins.
Hey there, after you've finished enjoying this podcast, might I recommend you join me, Tim Hammerich, and our guests on Clarity at Work from Zoetis. We'll be talking genetics and their place on the dairy. You've got a seat at the table as we discuss innovations, what's next for the industry, and more.
I have to find the value in everything that I do, and I still find value in Clarified Plus, so we're going to continue to use it.
Just search for Clarity at Work wherever you listen to podcasts. Once you finish with this podcast, of course.
Well, and Joel, you were one of the leaders of what I would still say is the greatest publication the Holstein breed has seen, the Holstein World. And your connection with Horace was critical for that piece, wasn't it? To put together for you and your family to have a magazine of the stature of the Holstein World. And those days are referenced in what you're talking about.
Yes, and first and foremost, I guess it was a business relationship with R. Austin Backus, the Backus brothers, being regular and steady advertisers of their sales in our publications, both Holstein World, and we did state magazines for New York and Pennsylvania. And we appreciated that a lot. And we also reported their sales, and so that we generated a lot of copy over what they accomplished, they and their consignors and their herd owners. So it was a close business relationship. Happily, it was also a very strong personal relationship, and I think that that's really one of the highlights of my career, was the opportunity to know and work with, but also appreciate particularly Horace, but also Charles. He died at an earlier age, and Horace continued in the business, and Dave can tell us a lot about that.
What does life on the cutting edge mean to alfalfa grower Dan Sheps?
Harv Extra has been very consistent on our test results from first crop through fourth crop. The higher quality has allowed us to feed less byproducts and feed more alfalfa haylage in our diet. And cows are able to have a higher intake with a higher quality forage.
Hear more of Dan's story at harvextra.com.
Well, thanks, Joel. And yes, as we move into Dave, Dave, I would say you and Mary have had one of the most successful cattle sales management companies in the business for years and years. And much of your mentorship and development of your business had to do with Horace. Tell us a little about your connection to Horace Backus.
One of the things Horace really tried to impress upon me, his dad had a stroke at a pretty early age, our Austin Backus. Horace and Charlie decided that at a certain age, because it is very stressful, as you know, you're also in the sales business. Horace said, David, you want to work to a certain age, really? And then at a certain age, you want to start to slow down a little bit because it's that stressful. And he said it really affected his dad. So I worked with Horace for over 30 years. And Horace had told me one day, he said, David, I've worked longer with you than I worked with my own brother, Charlie. So we spent, countless days on the road, traveling, eating like thousands of meals 3 times a day, and, stayed in hotels. And sometimes I took him on sales selections and get in at 2:00 in the morning. And it'd be tough on him because he was, older, but he wanted to go, he wanted to be there. Horace was a man that wrote numerous books. He was really a man so dedicated to this breed. I don't know that we'll ever find anybody like him again. The things that he would do for a sale, Tim, as you're well aware, because I know that you do it too. But I'd mail him a catalog. He'd use a red, blue, green, yellow pen to mark highlights. And then he would research the pedigrees even further, and sisters. They were also in the catalog building business, did hundreds of catalogs in a year. He was enthralled with pedigrees. Really, there's nobody that, as far as I'm concerned, going to a sale, he had a voice that really, whether it was a $600 heifer or a $60,000 heifer, he treated them the same. And he would emphasize their value to try to bring optimum results for the seller. I can't say enough about Horace, a real gentleman.
Well, David, you've actually opened up just where I want to go. One of the things I think that the legacy of Horace certainly is writing and his ability to sit in the box and read a pedigree, but his dedication to increasing the value of Holstein cows is like none other. He knew that you had to have promotion, and Joel, that's why you work so well with him with the Holstein world, because of the promotional efforts of his company. But guys, let's look into a couple of things that Horace did, which I would say was well before his time. Joel, talk a little. You've got some recollections of some of the sales series that Horace and his family started and what the value of them would have been in the industry.
Yeah, there were 2 sales series that were very important to not only the Backus organization, but to breeders in New York and Pennsylvania. The Earlville sales series, held in central New York, south of Syracuse, in the little community of Earlville, was a regular series. Monthly sales started back in 1924 by Horace's father, Horace and Charles's father, and that they continued into the late 60s. It was a monthly sale, pretty much monthly, and breeders could consign their so-called surplus heifers or other animals, older cows, and it really set the tone and set the market. It gave consigners an outlet for their cattle, It helped generate some cash flow for breeders and dairymen. It was certainly an important part of the business for the Backus organization. Their series in Pennsylvania were called the Garden Spot sales, similar in nature, consignments from around the state and maybe across the border in Maryland. Occasionally there were some really important cows that went through those sales, but it set the tone for the business and gave breeders an opportunity to merchandise some cattle at good value, get them some publicity for those consignments. Particularly in Pennsylvania, at the end of the year, instead of the December so-called garden spot, for many years they organized the Golden Harvest Sale with consigners from across the Northeast, higher quality cattle. They had always a good average. It was a real opportunity for breeders to not only generate some revenue and put their cattle out into the marketplace. I had more than one consigner from time to time say that sale in December helped make Christmas at home a lot better for his family and his children because of the cattle they were able to merchandise at the end of the year. Those sales, along with their dispersals, but those sales really set the Holstein marketplace in the Northeast and was a real contributing factor to the success of breeders in the Northeast.
Well, Joel, those are great stories of those sales series, and they're so powerful. David, you've been very involved with sales series, and they've made your business successful. But talk a little bit about the sales series that Horace and his family did, in your views of how it got you to where you wanted to be with your sales series, because Horace helped you a lot with yours as well.
Just listening to Joel, I mean, the Earlville sales, people like Mrs. Kellogg from the owners of Osbindale Farm, they had consignments from the best breeders of the day going to Earlville. And they also had, it wasn't just people from Pennsylvania and New York. I would read the registry. I saw a registry. We actually sold a registry one day at one of their 50th sale, anniversary sale or something. There was people from probably between Canada and the U.S., maybe another 20 states. They came from everywhere. One of the things that we learned is that, you work with people over a number of years and you build a base and you build trust. You try to build confidence with people that you're going to handle their cattle in the best manner. We would talk about it. Hey, let's face it, Earlville, if you go back and check, you'll see a lot of cattle brought $300, $500. Back in those days, cattle just didn't bring money. You were back in the 40s, late 30s, they were doing sales. Everything was different then. They powered through, they built a base, they built a name. And then they by having that sales series, they really became preeminent powerhouse in the East, whether it was Pennsylvania or New York. Good God, when I went to college, I'd pick up the Holstein World and I'd go through there and I'd say, Backus has got a sale on this day, that day, this day. Their month would be like 6 sales in a month. Traveling, they were like, you're like a carnival when you start doing that many sales. You pitching tents and tearing down. And by doing a sales series like that, you build a base, people have confidence in you. People they wanted Horace Backus. Listen, they would love, if they knew Horace was going to be at the sale, it didn't matter if they had commercial cattle or top end registered in it. If you told them Horace was going to be the pedigree man, they were there. You could just see their face light up. That just meant something, extra. And for me, that was a tremendous addition. He was my mentor. He was one of my best friends. Actually, almost got to where almost like a father in many ways. I remember him coming to Thanksgiving dinner here and families melding, and he did not have life easy. A lot of people, I've heard people say, well, I must have had a lot of money. Horace had some family things that happened. Unfortunately, his son Harry had been in a tragic accident, and they took care of Harry until Harry passed 5 years ago. And, so life was not easy, but he loved the people in the business. That was his breakout. That was That was his release to get out and be amongst the people and the good cattle. But the sales series, they built their name for Backus. That's what really built it.
And the other opportunity that I was talking about consigners and generating cash flow, but another real opportunity that helped breeders in the region was the opportunity to buy cattle, some of those top herds. How could a breeder, a small breeder in New York State, go over to Osbornedale and buy a calf? Well, probably wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
But when Osbornedale consigned some cattle to the Earlville sale, every breeder had a chance to participate. That was a very important addition. It let some really good cattle
Exactly.
come
Really
into-
spread
come into the
genetics
region.
around.
Yep.
Yep. We didn't have AI back then. This is even before AI, right, Joel?
Some of it was.
Yeah, some of it was. So it was very important to have those sales series to get genetics spread. And that's what they did.
And I'm going to interject with marketing. Think about it. What better way to build your brand at whatever farm than to use these sales series as your catalyst to do that? And Joel, you referenced that as a consigner, but also a buyer because it would allow people in. David, you said everybody, when Horace was going to be at a sale, and I'm going to ask each of you this, they would light up. What made Horace? What gave him that gift? You give me a couple things, and then Joel, you give me a couple things. Why did people want Horace in their lives?
Horace was the purest man I ever met. He was a gentleman that you never get to meet. I never, in all the time we spent together, those 30 years, very rarely, when I say rarely, maybe once or twice, did I ever hear him say anything disparaging about somebody. And that would have been because the person might have stiffed him for a lot of money or something. I mean, but my point is this: he never swore. He was one of the most literate men that I knew. An appetite for reading like you can't believe. I didn't, a man that sat at the table with Boeheim, a man that could sit at the table with, back when Syracuse won the national title. He was well respected by people, not just farm people. Anybody that ever met him, after 15 minutes of talking to him, knew they were talking to an extremely literate man with compassion. And the people on the farms would listen to him and listen to his voice and listen to his detail. And when he started getting excited about a pedigree. He'd build up his voice. And he'd get stronger and stronger. And then you're trying to sell the animal, and maybe we stop, and all of a sudden he starts again, and he'll throw in something like "Soar with the Eagles." You know what I mean? He would just at the right time, and then the bidding would commence again. I always tell people a little bit like going to church. When you and I are in the box, you pay attention to us. We're kind of, I'm the Pope, you're the Cardinal. And that's how it works. So to pay attention to what we say is gospel. When Horace talked, it was gospel. That's what people understood all the time.
Joel, that's right where I wanted to go. You've got a tough act to follow. I'm gonna interrupt for one thing. Rama, I never heard him speak ill about anyone. I heard him scold you a few times in the box.
Yeah.
Because you weren't going the direction he wanted. So that was good. That was good to scold. But he didn't speak poorly of you. He just needed to scold you. And I think Mary would support that.
Yeah.
Joel, David gave a great recount of why people loved Horace. My views are different than that, but tell us yours.
Well, I think Dave is exactly right in terms particularly of when Horace was working with and for cattle people. But I observed in Horace a trait that is rare, very rare. When folks would talk with Horace, he would listen and pay attention, and they felt that they were the only person that Horace was concerned about in that conversation. He could be 5 minutes before he was going to get in an auction box, and he'd still listen to what somebody wanted to say. He'd react to it. He'd look them in the eye. And I know that, including me, all of us felt that when Horace was talking with us, we were the only people that mattered. And it was really a unique trait and not manufactured at all. That was Horace. That was who he was.
Joel, that leads me to my views, and he certainly, for me, was the greatest orator this business has ever had. But the reason he was such a great orator was because he was that listener, and he had the ability to sit with Jim Boeheim and talk basketball. He had the ability to sit with Dave Rama and talk about cows, or talk to a young Tim Abbott that did not have any reason for Horace Backus to talk to him and make me feel like I was part of the business and part of his day. And that's a gift. You guys would recollect many of those stories, I'm sure. We could talk about all those things a long time. One of Horace's great passions were individual cows and individual farms. And guys, you've got great stories about that. Joel, would you go down the road of talking a little bit about the farms, the cows, the people that Horace was so passionate about, from either his own cattle that he was involved with breeding or close friends?
By working with Horace and my experience with Horace, but also from his books. One of the things his books show is what he loved and the bloodlines that he loved. But Osbornedale, Ivanhoe, and that family was very important in Horace's thinking for not only his own cattle activities, as a breeder and as a marketer, but also in terms of his contribution to the Holstein breed. And that flowed on down through to Elevation, which maybe was Horace's. He wouldn't say that he had a favorite bull, but I would, if I had to guess one, I'd say Elevation was right up there in Horace's thinking about the Holstein breed and great cattle. And some of the Elevation daughters that were so important to the breed. So those would be two things. Dave, before we started the conversation, you were mentioning back in the Butterfly Farms days, the farm that his father and his uncle owned back in Mexico, New York, the Lochinvar bull that you were saying some background about. And that's, I think, some of Horace's early enthusiasm as a young boy came from working with those cattle. And talk a little bit about what you've seen there.
Dunlogan that Horace had written on the Dunlogan sale in 1943, and Butterfly Farm, actually, his dad and his uncle acquired half interest in Montvic Lochinvar. Talking before AI, okay? So Dunlogan had used used the bull very heavily, as well as somebody else, and so they acquired half interest and used him rather extensively in the butterfly herd. The butterfly herd, which Horace would talk about quite a bit, and he could tell you the records. Cows that were in that herd. He had records to 1,200 pounds of fat back we're talking the 40s now. They had a number of national leaders, bred just a tremendous set of cattle. I actually stopped. Horace took me to the old facility. I think all was left was a silo one day up there. You probably were there numerous times, Joel, and saw where the Butterfly Farm was. But Butterfly Farm, it was, when they had a dispersal, it was, I think, one of the highest that year, if not the highest that they sold out. When we talk about great cows, we're talking about like the dam of Ivanhoe. If you read his books, he's just how, the size and stature and length and, goes on, and how he was just struck with that. I don't know if he had favorites because he wrote about so many great cows. He's got all these books, and every book you read about, he is in detail talked about sons, the families, and how impressive these cows were. I know when we sold Apple, the year when we sold Apple, and she brought $1 million, that cow and Horace Red pedigree on her. We always talked about Apple and her effect on the breed, and it was the effect. I think it was the effect that certain cows would have on the breed, positive effect. Those were the cows that Horace would go back and really write about that had such a positive impact, and he'd seen them all. He could talk about their structure and talk about their owners in detail. recite the pedigree of an owner better than he could the cow almost. I don't know if that offers you much, Tim, but that's kind of what I saw out of him.
And as you said, he wasn't the guy to boast about cows he was involved with or particular cows, but certainly good recollections, gentlemen, of that. I want to move to another important area about Horace was his impact on the industry through leadership. I want to talk about some of his good friends in the industry and how he affected things. And Joel, when we started this discussion last night, we talked about his involvement with the Holstein board. Would you mind taking a walk down some of your recollections of his involvement with Holstein leadership, both at the state, regional, and national levels?
Because of his wide acquaintance and because of the respect that he commanded in people, was always sought out for his advice and counsel. And he was active locally. He was on the school board. He was on the church board. So he was appreciated for his acumen locally as well. But Horace not only traveled within the sale business, but during the height of his career, he may have spoken at more local Holstein Club meetings than the next five guys.
Yeah.
And that's pretty amazing when you figure the travel that he would undertake just in the course of his business. And then he'd go to Holstein meetings all over New York and Pennsylvania, talk to county clubs. They'd have a great turnout for him. He'd give the after dinner talk. And he had lots of tales about being the last speaker late at night or being an early speaker and who he met there. But during the time when he and Charles were very active in the sale business, they could have been routinely elected as delegates to the Holstein Association convention. But they felt that they were not active breeders at that point, and it was better that breeders be delegates. And so Horace didn't try to get too involved in national Holstein politics at that point. And he felt the same way about the state associations. His opinions were well regarded. Officers and directors would certainly talk to him and respect his advice and counsel, but he didn't feel it was his role to be an elected leader. Now, when the business changed, they sold R. Austin Backus. He was working more as a freelancer with Dave and on for other sales. He did run for the national directorship and served 2 terms, and was very well regarded on the Holstein board, as you might expect. He and Dave Bachman, their terms overlapped, and they were compatriots with a rather conservative financial point of view, but they were concerned that the Holstein Association not overextend itself based on a longer term view of what was going to be happening in the dairy industry and in the breed. And so they thought some caution was in order in terms of how the breeders' money got spent. They also both served on the audit committee and had questions for staff. They took that responsibility very seriously and paid a lot of attention and spent the time needed to really dig into Holstein affairs, Holstein activities in terms of the association.
His wisdom and knowledge, I mean, they sought it out, very well respected. He worked with people like Sherm Pollender, Sleepy Hollow, Kip Herzog, great people, Nunes. I mean, the biggest names in the business, and just regular everyday people that don't, they're back on the farms. But he worked with all those people on the board, but he was very fiscally responsible. And he had everybody on the board was his friend. That I would tell you.
And David, you both referenced something. He always took a position to better the breed, and whether it's fiscally responsible or battling for the right thing on a pedigree, he always had the betterment of the breed in mind. And I think you guys referenced that. One thing you both touched on that I think is important to our listeners, and the older we get, the more important this is. Interestingly, Dave Bachman had a huge cattle sales business in the Midwest, if I'm not mistaken, at that time, David. And Horace and his family had the one in the East. They were competitors. There's no other way to say that. But isn't it speaks volumes to people that are competitors and then end up great friends. And I'd like you both to comment a little bit on what you know about that or other relationships that Horace had in competitive roles.
Horace worked a lot of sales in Canada, as you're well aware, as you now do. The biggest sales. I don't care if it was for Bob Shore, who I thought was one of the greatest auctioneers of all time. Any big sale in Canada, he was called upon to go up there. And when he was younger, he would go to the West Coast. It didn't matter. He'd go to the Midwest. They were competitors, but he also worked together with people, co-managed sales with different sale managers, and you have too, and you work together. You're working for the client, so that's what he did. They would co-manage sales, maybe select cattle from the East. The other person would select cattle from the Midwest or the West. They'd have a sale at the MGM, be a heck of a sale. And no, he got along with virtually everybody.
Any recollections, Joel, of his partnerships and friendships that you think he would want talked about today?
I think Horace would, number one, caution us not to get too carried away today. Horace was he had a lot of self-respect, and he was proud of what he accomplished, but he was a humble person.
Humble man. Humble.
And he did not relish the spotlight. Tim, you recall, and Dave, you recall a few years ago at the World Classic when Tim Euchen signed that calf that was to be sold for the benefit of the Horace Backus Scholarship Fund at the Holstein Foundation. Horace wrote me a letter after that. He complimented what we'd written in the catalog, but he also said he never would have asked for that, never would have thought about it, but he said it was kind of fun and it was a nice ride and he appreciated it. I think that kind of typifies Horace's view that he did not need to be recognized. That was not his thing, but he was always appreciative of folks who appreciated him.
Well, and the stories of the sales that he read pedigrees at, we could go on forever and ever. For me, a young guy going to the World Classic sale, there was nothing like it. When the lights dimmed in that huge arena and you heard Horace's voice come on and he read the pedigree of that first lot in the sale, I dreamt as a young man of having that animal, that Horace would read that lot number 1 pedigree in the World Classic sale with thousands of people and all the spotlights. That voice became the voice that people wanted to hear around the world. We talked a lot about his pedigree reading. Give a quick account of either a story or a reason why you think his pet ability in a box. And David, you talked about you were preaching, you and Horace, when you were together. I would set you straight. You were not the Pope if you were in the box with Horace. I'll make sure our listeners know that. But tell a little what it was like to sit in that box beside Horace Backus.
When you're in the box, you want to have the best sale you can have. And there's some days that are just remarkable, like Rice Crest. You, all of a sudden, Horace and I will be giving wisdom to somebody. I remember there was, for instance, an investor wanted to get started in the business, and he was looking at a one cow. She was a formation, and if somebody asked my advice, I'm going to give it to him. Said, "Hey, great cow. I think that she's worth 12. Really at a high limit, 15,000. Horace and I don't go over 15,000." All right, so we, this is before the sale, go through stuff with them. The sale gets done. All of a sudden, we're selling this formation. She gets to 30 and 32, 3, 4, 5, and a 35, 30, 36,000, bang, 35,000. We look down, who buys it? The guy we gave advice to. So Horace and I decided we don't need to give a lot of advice to anybody. We just tell them the pedigree and let them bid, those are the moments that you would cherish, So on those great days, and then of course on the days when things were a little tough, climb out of the box and say, whew. But we had a lot of great days, and those were the, when you climb out of the box and you start talking about this one brought 50,000 and this one brought 10,000 and whatever. And the last thing I'll tell you is sitting down with Horace, Tim, and Joel, is that when I first started with Horace, we would go to these sales, and Horace and I'd sit there, mark our catalog, and Horace would say, "We have 3 cows in the sale with over 1,000 pounds of fat. Wow, three with over 30,000 of milk." That was when we first started working together. Eventually, we got to the point where the whole catalog was 1,000 to 1,500 pounds of fat. So my point is, we kept talking about how the breed was improving genetically. I mean, the one thing about the breed is that when you look at the butter fat and the protein today and the volumes of milk, my goodness, from when I started with Horace and we just kept talking about it, all of a sudden you got a catalog that's just filled with production like you can't believe. He realized that, and he was very involved in the betterment of the breed. He really was.
I would really second that, Dave, and I'd add this thought. Horace had a unique combination of knowledge and enthusiasm. Knowledge without enthusiasm doesn't necessarily accomplish much. Enthusiasm without knowledge is kind of tiresome.
Right.
But he had a unique combination of both that he had throughout his life that I think was incredibly attractive, but also helped him succeed remarkably. The other thing I would say, as much as Horace appreciated history and enjoyed looking and exploring and recalling, Horace was never one of these guys who said, "Well, cows back in those days, those were when the cows are really good. This stuff on predicted difference or PTAs, yeah, we can't get any good cows anymore." Horace never believed that for a minute, and he always appreciated the progress of the breed. He might or might not claim to be the latest and greatest with technology, but Dave, you can cite that bull that you sold in New York online at Oakfield. Yes. Horace, right. My point is, right to the end of his career, he would embrace the new information.
I mean, she brought $445,000, and it was the last effort he ever read a pedigree on, and I wanted him there. It was, to me, I knew it would be a highlight for him, and he loved it. It was great.
You only had a few bidders, and was it sell on Zoom or just
no?
On the phone?
We had telephone lines, and we had 2 lines where we had the lines open. It was a glorious day because I owned half the heifer. So, but it was a glorious day all around, and lambs on the other half, and it was from a great cow family.
You can tell Horace stories and recollections for days, but I do want to wrap up this discussion by talking about his impact on the breed through his writings and his catalogs, and also talk about his scholarship fund at the Holstein Association. We said, earlier in this discussion, we probably should have Deidre Harkenrider from the Holstein Association on with us, and we may get her on to talk a little bit about what they can do with this money that will be raised for Horace's fund. Joel, talk a little bit about the concept with this fund, kind of where it started, where it is today, and then David, I'd like to talk to you about what you have that's going to be upcoming to wrap up some of this. So Joel, if you wouldn't mind, give us a little of the vision. You were one of the catalysts to make this all happen.
Well, the Holstein Foundation has an educational program that attracts young folks in the dairy industry, both farmers and breeders and industry folks. They're in the 20-something category, post-college usually. And those folks are busy. They're starting their careers. Money can be kind of tight at that point. We thought maybe something to help contribute, attract attendance and help attendees would be something that Horace could appreciate. And when we talked with him about it, he did. Again, he was not all that excited about having his name attached to it. That wasn't particularly important to him. But when we asked him if we could raise some money in his name, he allowed us that might be okay, since it was going to go to a good cause of helping to educate young dairymen and young industry folks. So that was kind of the beginnings of it. And then it got a great push at the World Classic. I think it was 2013 when you consigned a terrific pedigreed animal, and she was sold and resold, and the funds were donated from all across the board. That fund has attracted contributions since then as well. So it's a very worthwhile cause. It's one that Horace thought was important from his point of view. And we thought it was also fitting that a good registered Holstein calf sold at auction would be kind of the kickoff for that activity.
You're right. It surely started that. But I think today, as people listen to this podcast and they wonder how can they honor Horace, I think one of the great honors that we could give Horace is to continue to add to that fund and help young enthusiasts of this business become more educated, become better at what they do, become better stewards of the breed. And those are all things Horace stood for. And Joel, this fund will go to help people with that. So I really encourage our listeners to lean back in your chair and say, you know, where do I want to make a donation in Horace's name? And, you know, certainly the Holstein Foundation, you know, we can connect you with that. David, the other piece of this is memorabilia. You know, I think about this, guys, and David, you are in charge of you're the curator of the Horace Backus collection. And think about how the greats in any business, whether it's baseball cards or uniforms or what have you, for the greats in their industry, they have great value. They have great value. They have great memories. David, talk a little bit about what you have in your collection and maybe your vision from your discussion with the family of what you're going to do with these pieces.
I have a number of books. I have a number of marked catalogs from Horace and unmarked catalogs that we will do another online auction on cowbuyer.com in early December. And the family, his son John, has instructed me to take any of the proceeds and use those proceeds now towards the Horace Backus Scholarship Fund at the Holstein Association. So from now on, whatever you purchase in the next auction, there might be one after that too, but or any of the books. Horace, again, tremendous author, wrote a lot of books. I've got Dunlogan, I've got Mount Victoria Farms, I have Seed Stock 4. You know, he had to write, before he got to 4, he had to write 1, 2, and 3, okay? Scatterings and Milestones. I have a number of his writings. There will be no more. There'll be no more printed. Whatever I have, if people would like to buy them, I think back when Horace was selling his books, it was like $30 a book. We're going to let them go for $25 plus shipping. If I have the book that you want, great, we'll get it to you. We need your address so that we can figure out what it's going to cost to ship. We need your money, and that money will be sent to the Holstein Association in the name of the Horace Backus Scholarship Fund. So we are going to raise more money for the youth in the industry, and these are the last books, and that's it. There will be no more.
So David, we'll have our listeners keep track. We will put promotion out on these publications and through Dairy Business for sure of the upcoming plan to sell these items. And David, you'll promote those and let people know. But we're down to, you don't have many of these left to sell, and they are going to be iconic collector's items in the business since Horace's passing. And I guess I would reach out if you're an educator, if you have a library at your university, you have a library in your ag program at your high school, there would be no more powerful thing to gift to those spots than a Horace Backus book. And, I'm sure David would be glad to write you a story in the front cover of every one. David, you do that for universities. And I'm glad I've signed you for that. But seriously, there's so many different areas of the industry that could use these books and these catalogs and these writings from one of the greatest of our time.
I think my former colleague Deidre Harkenreiter would also want me to add that if you have enough Holstein memorabilia, if you already own Horace's books, you can make a donation to the fund in Horace's name on this occasion in any event. So it's not necessary to be a buyer. You can make a donation to the scholarship fund.
She will appreciate that, and she'll be very frustrated. David and I didn't do that before, but no,
Yeah.
great comment. So, guys, we've been on here, had a great discussion. Again, I appreciate what you've done. I'd like each of you to give some parting thoughts and kind of your wrap up of the discussion about one of the greats our industry's ever seen. David, I'm going to start with you.
You hear the term greatest of all time, and whether it was Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, the greatest of all times, on many of these that you hear about, they all had some major flaws. They all had some problems in their lives that they brought on themselves. Horace was the greatest of all time and a man of no flaws. I truly feel that way. I watched how much he loved his family, he loved his friends, was committed to his community, to the industry that he was involved in. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke. He knew I'd covered that for him. He was, in my mind, one of the most flawless human beings that I ever met, and that's the way I saw the man. That's my 2 cents.
I'm going to second that. There's nothing I can say to top that. I completely agree with David that Horace Backus was the GOAT of the Holstein industry, and it is a sad day when on his passing. We'll miss him, but he had declining health, and as we say, he's no doubt in a better place at this point. And it was certainly our privilege and pleasure to know him and benefit from all of his wisdom.
Well, today's been a tremendous day for me. I've looked forward to this for some time as we developed a plan. And as I wrap up, I think about the impact Horace had on my life, and I've had 2 of his best friends in the industry talking about him, and so many stories that really hit home with all of us. I don't know if we should try to emulate or imitate Horace. I think one thing we need to all do is recognize his greatness and continue his spirit through his name. So let's work on this fund. So for years and years and years, we have enough money that 2 generations down the road, we are still giving a scholarship in Horace's name. So the next generation and the following generation can learn and do the readings of Horace Backus. A couple things that really stuck out to me, guys, as I wrap this up. As we sat here on the Showbox and talked about this today, a man with no flaws. Is there any better tribute to a person than what Joel and David have said about Horace? And I would totally agree, and I think the whole world of listeners would agree. 2 other things that I think our listeners can take from this. There's so many morsels. I believe, Joel, you said this. You talked about knowledge and enthusiasm. The combination of those 2 things together make you extremely powerful. And nobody had more knowledge and more enthusiasm for what he did than Horace Backus. And then the other thing that really resonated with me was the discussion about speaking and listening. You can be a great orator, but if you're not a great listener, you don't get to the people. The reason Horace Backus got to the people is because he had 2 ears and he listened and cared. So, gentlemen, it's been a wonderful wrap-up. Certainly does not do justice to the life of Horace Backus, but it's our attempt to send to our listeners of this podcast series through Dairy Business and the Showbox Sires series of the evolution of the great cow. We didn't talk much about the evolution of the cow today, but we talked about the greatest person that our industry's seen to help us develop our cow. Thank you for listening, and we'll look forward to having you on future issues of our discussions.
Thank you both.